Hello and good morning. Joe Justice here, coming to you live on January 19th, 2023. Can you believe we are almost at the end of January now? We are past the middle of January. We're already well into 2023, and it's pretty unbelievable. But listen, I wanted to come to you today with something kind of fun to talk about. I am a real sucker for swords and sorcery fantasy. I was never a big high fantasy kind of guy. Never really into the whole world building and all that stuff that goes into the more high-minded, high-browed stuff. Give me a guy with a sword punching the bad guys, cutting off the heads of wizards, that kind of stuff. That is the stuff that I love the most. And of course, you can't really talk about that without talking about Conan the Barbarian, who is the ultimate swords and sorcery. A lot of people consider him to be the original swords and sorcery character. Well, they just recently came out, the company that owns Conan the Barbarian just recently came out with a new novel based on one of the best short stories that Robert E. Howard wrote, which is called Red Nails. And the new book that came out, it's kind of a prequel to that short story. So just to kind of give you a quick, well, what's interesting about Conan and that whole world is so Conan's been around for so long that you can see the evolution of physical culture through him as a pop culture icon, which is really kind of interesting. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about because I've got some pictures here that I found on Google. And but just to kind of give you a primer on who Conan the Barbarian is. Conan is a character that was created by Robert E. Howard in this mythological Hyborian age, and he's called a Cimmerian. A Cimmerian Sumer is this or Simmer. I don't know. Some of these words you never say out loud, so you don't know how they're pronounced. But Simmer is this place that's basically Scotland. So what Robert E. Howard did was he got sick of researching all of these locations. So in order to write, you got to remember, this was all back in the 30s. And if you wanted to write something about, 15th century France, then you had to do a bunch of research. You had to find books. It wasn't, just Googling it like it is today. And he got sick of doing all this research to make his stories accurate. So he kind of created these amalgamated kingdoms, these amalgamated worlds. And Sumer is basically Scotland, Ireland, kind of England a little bit. And there's a bunch of other places that he created, like Stygia is basically ancient Egypt. And, Aquilonia is basically ancient Rome. So all these kind of kingdoms existed at the same time. And this was all, this world existed before the flood. So all this stuff was wiped out before the world that we have today. So he was just basically able to invent things as he went. His very first story was called The Phoenix and the Sword. And it was all about a wizard named Tothamon. And I've read all this stuff over the years since I was a kid. I read all this stuff, and I loved this type of fiction. I thought this type of fiction was the coolest kind. It all goes back to 1932. That was the very first story. Now, he wrote a handful of books, a handful of short stories: The Frost Giant's Daughters, The God in a Bowl, The Tower of the Elephants, Black Colossus, The Scarlet Citadel, The Queen of the Black Coast, The Veil of the Lost Woman, Devil in Iron, The People of the Black Circle, A Witch Shall Be Born, An Hour of the Dragon, Red Nails, The Pool of the Black One, The Halls of the Dead One, The Hand of Nergal, and The Black Stranger. These are all the stories. That's it. That's all he wrote about Conan the Barbarian. And those are all short stories or fragmented short stories, stuff that he had written but hadn't completed or whatever. So then what happened later on was he was basically rediscovered kind of so all that stuff was basically for a Weird Tales magazine. So let me show you some of this stuff. So here's what's kind of interesting. What I think is kind of interesting. If you take a look at Conan as he existed in Weird Tales, so this is Devil in Iron. Now you'll see he's basically, from an artistic standpoint, he's basically depicted as a pretty average-looking guy, what we would consider today. We certainly wouldn't put him in the same category as someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And you can even see the artwork inside the magazine itself. Now, what was really kind of interesting about this is that I read this years ago. Robert E. Howard had an extensive collection of. Oh, I'm not showing you the pictures. Sorry about that. So this is Conan, and this is the way he was depicted back then. And you can see, like, he's not, nothing extraordinary. Like, you would not associate him with Arnold Schwarzenegger. You wouldn't think of him as this giant, all, powerful barbarian type that you see nowadays. Um, and then you can also see here, this is the way he was depicted inside the magazine. So you can see he wasn't like this super powerful, gigantic man. This is the biggest version of him that I saw. Like a powerfully built man, but nothing like I say, like nothing like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, what was interesting about this is this picture right here is really kind of cool because I remember reading one time, Robert E. Howard had an extensive set of letters that he would send to people, and I remember reading one time that he didn't like the way that the artist depicted Conan as being Roman. He said that it was a woman that did all the artwork, she gave him a Roman cast that he didn't like. And you can see that in some of these images. He looks very Roman to me. And Conan was supposed to be basically, like I said before, he's basically supposed to be a Scottish man or an Irish or something along those lines. Something in that Northern European kind of concept. So it's all pretty interesting. So then what happened many years later, so this was back in the 60s, going into the 60s, 1966, there was a book called Conan the Adventurer that was written by L. Sprague de Camp. And that's this book right here. Now you're starting to get this super muscular version of Conan. And so now you're starting to get this bodybuilder type look. So you have to remember this artwork, and tons of Conan's artwork was done by a guy named Frank Frazetta. And this will kind of give you an idea of some of Frank Frazetta's work. You can see most of this stuff was like bodybuilding type stuff. So this was all stuff from the 60s and 70s. And this is that classic fantasy art that people my age think about. When they think about fantasy art, they think of this type of look. They think of these kinds of guys. And so this was informed by, of course, bodybuilding culture. So you can see, I mean, it's very clear that bodybuilding had become a thing at this point, and you can see like the muscular structures and stuff like that. Whereas, you take a look, like I said, you take a look here and you see like a powerfully built man in the old Weird Tales depictions, but you do not see this kind of bodybuilding look that Frank Frazetta was bringing to it. And then his next book was Conan the Warrior. You can see Conan the Warrior here again. This was Frank Frazetta, so this was in the 60s. And then later on in the 70s, you had the Marvel comic books. And the Marvel comic books, you still don't quite get, you do start to get the bodybuilder aesthetic, but it's not anywhere near. Now, a bunch of these other comic books came later. And as time went on into the 70s, you started to see more of a bodybuilding influence into this stuff. The bodybuilding look was, kind of a really solid, aesthetically pleasing look. That bodybuilding look that was developing in the late 60s into the 70s that really informed the 80s, that was the look of Arnold Schwarzenegger and all that whole Lou Ferrigno, all that golden era of bodybuilders. And it was it was not based on having like the biggest muscles or having being the biggest guy in the room. It was based on more of an aesthetic, more of a trying to have a balanced, symmetrical, well-proportioned body. Now, and that exact same, so then that, all this stuff is happening at the same time in kind of an aesthetic milieu. I don't know how to pronounce that word exactly. So this kind of aesthetic mix of all this stuff happening at the same time. And then you get into, of course, He-Man, Masters of the Universe started copying all this stuff right around the same time as the movie was coming out. So then there was Conan the Barbarian, the movie that came out, the very popular movie. Now this version was from the 2000s, and this is Jason Momoa played him, but you can see the original Arnold Schwarzenegger version. Now what's interesting about this, again, now you look at this, and this is this aesthetically pleasing type look, but you can take a look at this and you can compare Arnold Schwarzenegger to when he was in his bodybuilding prime, and you can see that the look was different. He lost a lot of weight for this role. So even as Conan the Barbarian, he wasn't nearly as muscular, because Conan had to have more of an appearance of being fit and athletic than the appearance of a bodybuilder. So even you can compare, like him, Arnold Schwarzenegger here in his bodybuilding peak to his role as Conan the Barbarian. You can see some more of the artwork around the same time. All this stuff, and then from this point onward, everything related to Conan and that type of look, that type of world, was all based on basically Arnold Schwarzenegger and that role. But they kind of created each other, which is kind of funny when you think about it. It's not exactly that Conan the Barbarian, the movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't create the aesthetic that was used to create Conan the fictional character. It's more like Conan the fictional character informed the aesthetic that eventually became Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that's the big difference. And that's why you can take a look at those. If you go back in time, you can take a look at some of that stuff, and you can take a look at the artwork and see what a powerfully built man looked like. And it was quite a bit different than what we have today with bodybuilding, because it's so there's so many chemicals and pharmaceuticals and stuff like that involved in the look of modern bodybuilders, that you don't get that realistic kind of super alpha male powerful look that you had back then. You don't even get the golden era symmetry and just big, well-defined muscular look that you had back in the golden era. So, all right, well, that was fun. I love talking about this stuff. It was fun to take a look back at that stuff and talk about it. And thank you for watching. Hope that you found something interesting in there. Hope you have a great day, and I will see you guys next week. Bye for now.